The Constitutional Court, the highest court in the land, has declared the Electoral Act as being unconstitutional. There is a choice that you can make as an individual, and that choice entails not being affiliated to any political party.
2020 got the clock ticking on electoral reform, and while politicians have been slow, they have until July 2022 to amend the Electoral Act to allow for independent candidates to stand for provincial and national office. In this video, I am going to summarize the historic New Nation judgment.
Choose South Africa and let South Africa choose you.
On Thursday, 11 June 2020, the Constitutional Court handed down a landmark judgment. This was an application for leave to appeal against the judgment and order of the Western Cape High Court. The application concerned whether the Electoral Act is unconstitutional to the extent that it did not allow for independent candidates to run for the National Assembly and provincial legislatures as independent candidates. Just before the 2019 election, the New Nation movement approached the Constitutional Court on an urgent basis, and what they were applying for would have radically changed the face of that election had it been approved. However, the Constitutional Court did not deem the matter urgent and only heard the matter after the election. Now, before we get into the meat of the matter, let's pause here and discuss the rights that were debated by the opposing sides. Let's start with Section 18 of the Constitution, which deals with the right to freedom of association, which is about the individual's right to be free to form an association with whomever he or she wants to and for whatever purpose. Of course, the purpose must be one that is worthy of protection. For instance, an association may not be formed for the purpose of treason or looting. I'm looking at you, July 2021. Section 19 of the Constitution deals with political rights, and Section 19.3 says that A, every adult citizen has the right to vote in elections for any legislative body established in terms of the Constitution, and B, every adult citizen has the right to stand for public office and, if elected, hold office. This matter was appealed from the High Court, and the applicants approached the Constitutional Court arguing that the Electoral Act is unconstitutional for two reasons. Firstly, it unjustifiably limited the right to stand for public office and, if elected, to hold office, as conferred by Section 19.3b of the Constitution. And secondly, the Act infringed on the right to freedom of association, which is protected by Section 18. Opposing the application, the Minister of Home Affairs, the Electoral Commission, and the Speaker of the National Assembly contended that Section 19.3b of the Constitution is in fact neutral, and it doesn't require that members of the National Assembly and provincial legislatures must be independent candidates, or must include independent candidates. Secondly, they argued that other provisions in the Constitution do not allow you to achieve proportional representation other than through traditional political parties. Now, in a majority judgment penned by Justice Madlanga, with Justice Cameron, Jafta, Kampepe, Matopo, Mhlanhla, Tehran, and Victor in agreement, the Constitutional Court agreed with the New Nation movement and upheld the appeal. The court said that the Electoral Act is unconstitutional to the extent that it requires that adult citizens be elected to the National Assembly and provincial legislatures exclusively through their membership of political parties. In reaching this conclusion, Justice Madlanga's judgment said that the freedom of association challenge is inextricably linked to the content of Section 19.3b. Therefore, this matter was not only about adult citizens not being coerced to be members of political parties, but it was also about them not being forced to associate in order to run for public office. The court embarked on an interpretive exercise and found that Section 18 not only protects the positive right to associate, but also the negative right not to be compelled to associate. The court held that if the state compels an individual to associate with a political party when such individual does not want to, that limits the right to freedom of association. The court highlighted that although there may be advantages to being a part of a political party, it is undeniable that party political membership also comes with its impediments. Therefore, the conscious choice not to join or form a political party is as much a political choice as is the choice to form or join a political party, and is equally deserving of protection. The court then dealt with the issue of proportionality. Now, proportional representation was incorporated into our Constitution via sections 46(1)(d) and 105(1)(d), which respectively provide that the National Assembly and provincial legislatures consist of women and men elected in terms of an electoral system that results in proportional representation. In addition, Section 1D says that South Africa must have a multi-party system of democratic government. Now, the court found that all of these provisions simply mean that South Africa must not be a one-party state, and that the provisions say nothing about exclusive party proportional representation. Having considered all this, the court found that insofar as it makes it impossible for independent candidates to stand for political office without being members of political parties, the Electoral Act limits their participation in political activity. The question then became whether or not this is a reasonable and justifiable limitation in terms of Section 36(1) of the Constitution. In this regard, the court could not conceive any reason to justify a limitation of such an important right, and found that the opponents had offered no compelling justification. It was thus declared that insofar as it makes it impossible for candidates to stand for political office without being members of a political party, the Electoral Act is unconstitutional. A second judgment, penned by Justice Jafta, highlighted two important additional principles. The first principle is that political rights in Section 19 must be read in its historical context, in which Africans were denied the right to vote and the right to be voted into public office. The second principle is that the language employed in Section 19 must be accorded a generous and purposive meaning in order to give every citizen the fullest protection afforded by that section. I now turn to a minority judgment written by Justice Froneman, which disagreed with the reasoning and outcomes of the first and second judgment on the merits. The minority judgment, however, makes an important contribution regarding proportionality. It says that the entrenchment of proportional representation and its achievement through the vehicle of political parties flows from the prioritization of equality in political voice, that every vote counts equally, over the accountability that might be better secured through a constituency-based system or a mixed system. The purpose of Section 19 is not merely that whole categories of citizens must not be excluded from voting as it was in the past, but also that never again must some people's voices count more than others in a representative democracy. The rationale thus goes beyond disenfranchisement to the distortion of equality in political voice. Parliament must now allow independent candidates to stand for and hold political office. Justice Froneman warned that allowing independent candidates could lead to another constitutional challenge if the legislation failed generally to yield to proportional representation. This discussion, framed differently, becomes particularly important when considering the amendment bill that was proposed by the executive. The Constitutional Court has laid the foundation for electoral reform, and now it's up to Parliament to give meaningful, equitable, and substantive effect to the rights of independent candidates. The court gave Parliament 24 months to amend the Electoral Act to correct this constitutional defect. The process moved slowly, but the Minister of Home Affairs eventually set up a ministerial advisory committee, and that committee came up with two options on electoral reform, and those options are currently being debated. This is where you come in. As a citizen, you are entitled to tell your public representative which option you prefer and why. You can send a letter to the committee and to your MP, and if you need help drafting that letter, don't worry, we got you.
Choose South Africa and let South Africa choose you.